Hello. I caught my fiancée cheating with her coworker right before I was about to surprise her with a $2,200 trip. I didn't confront her or cause a scene. I just disappeared from her life. Later, karma handled the rest. Her new guy crashed her car and ran off, and she eventually showed up at my workplace begging me for help. My name is Adrian, I am 31, and I work as a procurement analyst for a hospital network in Bristol. My weeks are structured, my hours are early, and I am the kind of person who books train tickets 2 months ahead just to save £12 and avoid chaos. My fiancée was Nina, 29, and she worked in corporate sales for a software company across town. We had been together a little over 4 years and engaged for 8 months. We did not own a place together yet, but she stayed at my flat most nights, had drawers full of clothes there, and we had already started talking seriously about wedding dates, guest lists, and where we would live after. At the start, what I liked about Nina was that she was sharp. She could walk into a room and act like she already knew how everything worked. I am more methodical than charismatic, so her confidence balanced me out for a while. The problem was that after the engagement, that confidence stopped feeling like confidence and started feeling like contempt. She had a way of correcting people over tiny things, especially service staff, receptionists, and anyone she thought she could get away with speaking down to. With me it came out differently. More private, more polished, but just as pointed. She started treating every disagreement like a performance review. If I forgot to answer a text while I was in a supplier meeting, I was unreliable. If I questioned a wedding expense, I was cheap. If I said I was tired and wanted a quiet Friday night, I was suddenly lacking ambition. She never screamed. That would have been easier to deal with. Instead, she used that calm, clipped tone that made every sentence sound like she was generously explaining my own shortcomings back to me. What kept me from walking earlier was that the relationship still made sense on paper. Same age range, same city, decent incomes, no dramatic history, no obvious red flags that would make friends pull me aside and tell me to run. Even when she was being difficult, there was always a plausible explanation. Stress at work, wedding pressure, her mother calling every day with opinions. It all sounded temporary. Around that time, I had booked a surprise trip for us to Lisbon. Flights, hotel, dinner reservation, the whole thing. It came to just over $2,200 once everything cleared on my card. I did not tell Nina because I wanted one clean moment that still felt good between us. Looking back, that was probably the last week I was still trying to prove the relationship could be saved by effort. 3 days before I planned to tell her, she said she had to stay late with her team for end-of-quarter reporting. That by itself was believable. What was not believable was how quickly she grabbed her phone face down when it lit up on my kitchen counter. Then she gave me this annoyed look, like I had inconvenienced her by noticing it. That was the first time I stopped explaining her behavior to myself. I did not go digging immediately. I know that sounds strange, but I have never been the type to grab someone's phone and start playing detective because I feel insecure. I also knew that once I crossed that line, whatever I found would force a decision. Up to that point, I still thought there was a chance I was reading too much into a bad week and a sour mood. That lasted less than 24 hours. The next evening Nina was at my flat again, technically working from my kitchen table, which mostly meant clicking around on a spreadsheet while sending voice notes to friends and acting irritated every time I made a normal amount of noise in my own place. She had brought overnight things but was oddly restless the whole time, checking the time, reapplying lipstick for no reason, walking to the bathroom with her phone in hand even when she was just rinsing a glass. It was subtle enough that if I described it to someone, they could say I was being paranoid. But when you live around a person long enough, you notice when their routines stop matching their excuses. At around 8:30, she said one of her managers wanted the team back online for a late call. She packed in less than a minute. Laptop, charger, makeup bag, gone. No kiss goodbye, no normal small talk. Just this clipped thank you when I handed her the cardigan she forgot on the chair. She was already halfway out the door when I asked if everything at work was all right. She turned around and gave me a look I had started seeing more often. Not guilt. Annoyance. She said I was doing that thing again where I made her job sound suspicious just because I worked in a place where people still respected office hours. Then she left. That should have been the end of it for the night. But about 15 minutes later I noticed she had left her tablet on my sofa. It was one of those thin work devices synced to her phone notifications. I honestly just meant to message her and tell her to come back for it before I went to bed. The screen lit up before I could even pick it up properly. A message banner came through from someone saved as Lewis S. followed by a second one almost immediately. The preview was not enough to prove anything outright, but it was enough to make my stomach drop because it was written with the kind of familiarity that does not belong to co-workers staying late on quarterly reporting. Not even close. I stood there longer than I want to admit, just staring at that screen like it might somehow rearrange itself into something innocent. It did not. Another message came in. Then another. By then, the problem was no longer whether I was imagining things. The problem was that I was about to find out exactly how stupid I had been. I picked up the tablet and unlocked it. Nina had given me the passcode months earlier when she asked me to order something for her online, and like most people who are not hiding anything at the time, she never changed it. I remember thinking that if the messages turned out to be harmless, I would probably feel like an idiot for even opening them. They were not harmless. Louis S. was apparently one of the senior sales reps on her team. I knew the name vaguely because she had mentioned him a few times in passing, always in that dismissive tone she used when talking about co-workers she thought were less competent than her. According to her, he was average at best and lucky to still have a job. The conversation thread on the tablet told a very different story. It was not explicit in the sense of photos or anything like that, but it did not need to be. The tone alone made the situation obvious within about 10 seconds. They were joking about how ridiculous the office was that day, complaining about the same manager, and then sliding straight into plans for later that night. Not a group plan. Not a team thing. Just the two of them. What caught my attention was the timing. One of the messages from him said something along the lines of leaving the bar early so they could actually talk without her annoying fiancé blowing up her phone. That line was followed by a laughing emoji from her and a reply saying she would tell me she had another late work call. That was the moment something in my head shifted from confusion to clarity. The rest of the thread was basically confirmation of what I already suspected. They had been meeting up after work for at least a couple of weeks. Drinks first, then apparently ending up back at his flat a few times. The way they talked about it suggested it was already routine. There was one message that stuck with me more than the others. Louis asked if she was worried I might find out. Her response was short and very confident. She said Adrian is predictable. As long as I act busy and slightly annoyed, he backs off. I remember reading that line twice. Not because I was shocked she had said it. At that point, the tone of the entire conversation had already made it obvious what she thought of me. What surprised me was how calm I felt after reading it. No rush of anger. No dramatic urge to call her or drive somewhere and start a confrontation. Just a very clear realization that the relationship was already over. And once that thought settled in, the next decision became much simpler. Once I finished reading the messages, I put the tablet back on the sofa and sat there for a few minutes thinking about logistics. The relationship itself was already finished in my head, but there were still practical things to sort out. Nina did not officially live in my flat, but she stayed there often enough that half her wardrobe was in my spare room. Her makeup, shoes, and random boxes had slowly spread into my space over the last year. If I ended things, I wanted it clean and immediate, not a drawn-out series of awkward visits. Around 10 that night, she walked back into the flat. She looked slightly surprised to see me still awake. Normally, I would already be getting ready for bed on a weekday. She dropped her bag on the chair and started talking about how exhausting her team was and how the call had dragged on forever. I let her finish. Then I picked up the tablet from the sofa and handed it to her. Her expression changed instantly. Not panic. More like the mental calculation someone makes when they realize the situation they planned for is not the one they are standing in anymore. I told her I had seen the messages from Louis. I did not yell, and I did not insult her. I just explained that I knew about the last few weeks, that the relationship was over, and that she needed to collect her things tonight. For a moment, she tried to take the defensive route. She said I had invaded her privacy, and that work conversations could easily be misinterpreted if someone went looking for problems. That lasted about 10 seconds before she realized I had clearly read enough to know exactly what was going on. Then the tone shifted. She said it was not serious. She said it had only happened a couple of times. She said the wedding planning had made her feel trapped and she needed space. The explanations came out one after another, each slightly different from the last. I listened until she finished. Then I told her something simple. None of the explanations mattered anymore. The engagement was over and she needed to pack whatever she had at my place and leave tonight. I also told her that after she left, I would not be continuing contact. No discussions about fixing things, no post-breakup drama. Just done. For the first time that evening, she actually looked irritated. Not sad. Not ashamed. irritated that the situation was not unfolding the way she expected. Nina did not argue for very long once she realized I was serious. For about 5 minutes, she walked around the flat collecting things with the kind of sharp, irritated energy she usually reserved for customer complaints at restaurants. Drawer after drawer opened and shut. Shoes went into bags. Makeup disappeared into her case. Every movement looked like she wanted me to react. I did not. I stayed in the living room and answered a couple of work emails while she packed. The silence seemed to bother her more than if I had yelled. At one point she asked if I was really going to throw away 4 years over something that was not even a real relationship. I told her calmly that she had already thrown it away when she decided to start another one. After that she stopped trying to negotiate. Around 40 minutes later, she dragged 2 bags to the door. Before leaving she turned back and asked what I planned to tell people about the wedding. Her tone suggested she expected some kind of mutual cover story. I told her the truth was simple enough. The wedding was canceled because the relationship ended. That answer clearly annoyed her. She said I did not need to make things dramatic and that adults usually handled these situations with a bit more discretion. Then she added that embarrassing her publicly would just make everything messier than it needed to be. That was the last thing she said before leaving. Once the door closed, the flat went completely quiet. It felt strange at first because Nina filled space even when she was doing nothing. Music playing, phone calls, commentary about whatever she was scrolling through. Without that noise, the place suddenly felt twice as large. The next morning, I started dealing with the practical side of the breakup. The first call was to the small venue we had reserved for the ceremony. We had not paid the full balance yet, but the deposit was non-refundable. I canceled anyway. Losing the deposit was still cheaper than pretending the wedding was still happening. After that, I contacted the caterer and the photographer we had spoken with. Most of those contracts had not been finalized yet, which made things easier. Then I called my parents. That conversation was short. I told them the wedding was off and that the relationship had ended the night before. They did not push for details right away. My mother just asked if I was sure about the decision. I said yes. By the end of that afternoon, the wedding that had been planned for months effectively no longer existed. With the wedding canceled, the next thing I dealt with was the trip. The whole idea behind it had been simple. Nina had spent months complaining that our lives had become boring and predictable. According to her, I was too structured and too focused on work. So I booked a long weekend in Lisbon as a surprise. Flights, a small hotel in the center, and a dinner reservation overlooking the river. The total had come to just over $2,200. 3 days before the breakup, I had been planning the moment I would show her the tickets. Now I was canceling them. The morning after she moved her things out, I opened the airline confirmation email and checked the refund policy. Normally those cheaper tickets lock you in completely, but when I booked them I had added a flexible option out of habit. My job involves a lot of schedule changes, so I usually pay the extra few dollars without thinking. That small decision saved me. During my lunch break, I called the airline and canceled both tickets. After the service fee, most of the money went straight back to my card. The hotel was even easier. Their cancellation window was still open, so one short email later the reservation disappeared from their system. Within 2 days, almost the entire $2,200 was back in my account. At that point, I assumed Nina and I were finished with each other permanently. She had her life, I had mine, and the cleanest outcome was simply no contact. For a while, that seemed to be exactly what happened. About 2 weeks after the breakup, a mutual acquaintance from her office ran into me at a coffee shop near my workplace. We were not close, but we recognized each other from a couple of work events Nina had dragged me to. He asked if everything was all right between us, because apparently the situation at her office had turned messy. According to him, Nina had started openly seeing the same coworker I had seen in the messages, Louis. The relationship had become office gossip almost immediately because neither of them was very discreet about it. The interesting part was what happened a few days later. Nina owned a fairly new car that she was extremely protective of. She talked about it constantly and treated it like a status symbol whenever she met new people. One night she apparently let Louis drive it after they left a bar. He crashed it. Nothing catastrophic, but bad enough that the front end was damaged and the car had to be towed. The part that made people at her office talk was what happened after. Instead of staying to deal with the situation, Louis apparently left the scene and disappeared. Just like that. At the time I heard the story, I remember thinking the situation sounded almost absurd. I had not spoken to Nina since the night she left my flat, and I assumed whatever chaos she had going on now was no longer my concern. I was wrong about that part. After hearing that story, I went back to my normal routine and tried not to think about Nina anymore. My life had already started to settle back into something predictable. Work, gym, quiet evenings at home. The wedding plans were gone, her things were gone, and the constant tension that had been sitting in the background of the relationship was gone too. For about another week, I heard nothing. Then one afternoon something unusual happened at work. I work in the administrative wing of a hospital network office building. It is not the type of place where random visitors wander through the halls looking for someone. Most people who come in already have appointments or security badges. That day I was finishing a report at my desk when the receptionist called my extension. She sounded slightly confused. She said there was someone downstairs asking for me by name and insisting it was urgent. When I asked who it was, there was a short pause before she answered. Nina. For a second I honestly thought she must have the wrong person. Nina knew exactly where I worked, but she had never shown up there before, even when we were still together. She always said office buildings like mine felt depressing and bureaucratic. I asked the receptionist if Nina had said what she wanted. Apparently, she had only said she needed to speak with me for a few minutes, and that it was important. I told the receptionist I would come down. When I reached the lobby, I immediately saw her sitting near the entrance. The first thing I noticed was that she looked completely different from the last time I had seen her. Not physically different, but the attitude was gone. The usual confident posture, the sharp expressions, the sense that she was evaluating everyone around her. Instead, she looked tense. As soon as she saw me walking toward the desk, she stood up quickly and started talking before I even reached her. She said she needed help. The explanation came out in pieces. After Lewis crashed her car, he apparently disappeared almost immediately. He stopped answering her calls, stopped responding to messages, and within a few days he had taken time off from work. No one at their office seemed to know exactly where he was. The car, meanwhile, was still sitting at a repair shop. The damage was expensive, and the insurance situation was complicated because Lewis had been the one driving when it happened. Then she finally got to the point. She asked if I could help her cover the repair costs until she sorted everything out. That was the moment I realized why she had shown up at my workplace. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. Nina standing in the lobby of my workplace asking me for money was not a scenario I had ever imagined, even during the worst parts of our relationship. She had always been extremely proud of her independence and her income. One of her favorite habits was reminding people that she never relied on anyone. Now she was standing in front of me doing exactly that. I asked her to explain the situation properly. The repair shop had already inspected the car. The damage from the crash was worse than she expected. Front suspension, bumper, and part of the frame alignment. The estimate was several $1,000s. Her insurance company was still reviewing the claim because Lewis had been driving. From what she said, they were questioning whether the policy would fully cover the accident. Meanwhile, the repair shop wanted confirmation that the bill would be paid before starting the work. Lewis, on the other hand, had completely disappeared. He stopped answering her calls the night of the crash. He stopped responding to messages from coworkers. According to Nina, he had not even shown up at the office since then. No explanation, no updates, nothing. While she explained all of this, she kept glancing around the lobby like she did not want anyone hearing the conversation. Then she got to the point. She said she needed help covering the repair bill temporarily. Once the insurance company sorted everything out, she promised she would pay me back. I asked her why she thought I would do that. She hesitated for a second, then said that despite everything, we had spent 4 years together. She said she knew I was a decent person and that I had always helped her when things went wrong. That part was true, but it was also exactly the reason I had ended the relationship when I did. I looked at her for a moment and told her something very simple. I said I was not the person responsible for fixing problems created by the man she chose to replace me with. Then I told her I could not help her. Not with the car. Not with the insurance situation. Not with anything else. Her expression changed immediately. The same irritated look from the night she packed her bags came back for a second, like she could not believe the situation was not bending the way she expected. But this time I did not stay to argue. I wished her luck sorting out the situation, turned around, and walked back toward the elevators. That was the last conversation we ever had. When I got back upstairs, I expected to feel something dramatic about the whole interaction. Anger, satisfaction, maybe even regret. Instead, it mostly felt like closure. For the rest of the afternoon, I went back to work and finished the report I had been writing before the receptionist called me. Hospitals do not slow down just because your personal life used to be complicated, and honestly, the routine helped. Numbers, purchase orders, supplier contracts. Simple problems with clear solutions. By the time I left the office that evening, the conversation with Nina already felt distant. I assumed that would be the final chapter. About a week later, I learned how the rest of the situation played out. One of Nina's coworkers sent me a message out of the blue. The same guy who had mentioned the crash earlier. Apparently, the whole story had continued spreading around their office because the situation kept getting worse. Lewis never came back. From what people heard, he had quietly resigned and taken a job with another company in a different city. No explanation to Nina, no offer to help with the car, and no involvement with the insurance claim. As far as anyone could tell, he simply removed himself from the problem entirely. The insurance company eventually decided that the coverage would only pay a small portion of the repair costs because of how the accident had been reported. That left Nina responsible for most of the bill. Without going into all the details, it was expensive enough that she apparently had to take out a loan just to get the car fixed. On top of that, the office gossip about the whole situation did not exactly help her reputation at work. When two coworkers start dating publicly, and one of them crashes the other's car before disappearing, people tend to remember it. The strange part was realizing that none of this information actually changed anything for me. A few months earlier, I would have felt pulled into the situation somehow, like I needed to understand every detail or figure out if I could still help solve it. Now it just sounded like someone else's story. And the more distance I had from it, the clearer one thing became. Walking away when I did was easily the best decision I made that entire year. After that day in the lobby, Nina and I never spoke again. For a while I half expected another message or another attempt to contact me. Nina had never been someone who handled rejection quietly, especially when things did not go the way she planned. But weeks passed, then months, and nothing ever came through. No texts, no emails, no unexpected appearances. Eventually, the situation faded into something that just felt like a strange story from a previous chapter of my life. The canceled wedding ended up being the cleanest break I could have hoped for. We had not combined finances, we did not share property, and most of the wedding contracts had been early-stage deposits that were easy to close out. The only real loss was the small venue deposit and a few planning expenses, which in hindsight felt like a cheap price for clarity. The refunded Lisbon trip money ended up sitting in my account for a couple of months before I used part of it for something else entirely. Instead of a romantic trip, I booked a short solo holiday later that summer. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet few days away where I could reset after everything that had happened. Looking back, the strangest part of the whole situation was how predictable Nina thought I was. She had written it directly in those messages to Lewis. As long as she acted busy and slightly annoyed, I would back off. For a long time, that had probably been true. I avoided unnecessary conflict and preferred to solve problems calmly rather than escalate them. What she did not expect was that the moment I had clear proof of what was happening, the decision would be immediate. No arguments. No negotiations. No dramatic attempts to win her back. Just the end of the relationship and a locked door behind it. The irony is that when she eventually showed up asking for help, she was still expecting the same version of me she had been relying on for years. The predictable one who would quietly fix the problem. Instead, she met the version who had already walked away. And honestly, that is probably the most useful lesson I took from the entire experience. Sometimes the cleanest response to betrayal is not revenge, confrontation, or endless explanations. Sometimes the most effective thing you can do is simply remove yourself from the situation and let the rest unfold without you. Bye-bye.